All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the February Patternfly community meeting, or at least the first February one. I think we might have a second one before the end of the month, but we'll see. On the agenda today, we've got most of it's going to be going over our 5.2 release that just went out on yesterday, very recently. And then we'll have a little bit of a surprise Patternfly 6 Penta announcement. So kind of big picture, there's the different versions of everything. We're calling it the 5.2 release because that's what most of the packages are at. They're not all 5.2, but mostly if you want to know the specifics, you can look at this slide, which I'll send this slide deck out after, or you can look on the site. The release highlights page has that I captured in that screenshot on the right at the top. So you can reference that for what version of every package is the latest. And we have a specific note that is concerning a package that I think most, if not all, of the console applications are using. If you're using that Red Hat Cloud Services TSC Transform Imports package, you will need to be on at least version 1.0.7. If you're on a version of that package older than that, you will have problems. So please be aware of that. Next, we're going to start digging into some extension updates, starting with Jesse. Jesse, do you want to take the screen over?
I think I can in a second when I go over the log viewer stuff, but I just want to give a quick intro with this slide of all these different changes. So we have the log viewer, topology, and component group updates to share with you all today. I'll cover the quick change on log viewer in a second, and then Jeff will take over for some topology stuff, and then also we'll talk about component groups. But I want to give a little bit of background on the component groups before we kind of get into this, so that if any of you have caught our previous presentations on component groups, you might remember that we joined with HCC to take a look at their front-end components library and create Patternfly component groups. And this centralizes the commonly used components, simplifies maintenance, and improves discovery. And so after recognizing the success of this collaboration, we've continued working with other teams to repeat the process. So currently, we've been talking with the OpenShift team to migrate any of their commonly used components into component groups. And Don will be covering what that effort looks like in a bit. But first, I actually will share my screen really briefly. I'll steal it from you, Austin, to share the log viewer update. Hopefully you guys can see that. Essentially, that React DOM server rendered a string as a server-side function and shouldn't be used on the client side. So this was a misuse before this change. There were some problems with this function that would crash the page. So the best solution was hopefully a simple one, to get rid of the function and use a template string to avoid the anti-pattern. So just a quick update, but I just wanted to make everyone aware of it. And I think that's probably it on the log viewer side, just a quick one. And so I'll pass it off to Jeff to cover the topology updates. If you're ready, Jeff.
Okay, let me just share. Okay, so for this release, we fixed a few things, removing like the global use, global use of window and global, since those aren't really needed, and try to get rid of that stuff. We added the ability to have rectangular groups. So currently we usually have these held groups, and that's the default and remains the default. But you can change them if a application wants to make them rectangular. So that's the rectangular group. And like I said, so the default will still be held, but if an application wants, they can just set a flag and make it rectangular. Some build fixes were put in, and what else? We fixed the logic for hiding and showing details at scale. So now when you zoom way in, you'll see that you lose the details, but you can still see status. You can hover over the nodes and get the data back. What else? Bring the nodes, label on to the front if it's hovered on. So right now you see like the group label you lose, but if you hover over it, you'll see that it comes up. So now you can see it over that other node. So just some fixes basically to certain things, and the only real feature is the rectangular groups. And that's it for topology.
All right, then I think we can probably pass it off to Don with component groups.
Hey, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
All right, let me just share my screen. Can you see it now?
Yes, it just came up.
All right, cool. So component groups. So component groups was released back at the end of the year. It's basically Patternfly with stuff added on top of it that's specific to Red Hat, but anybody can use them. Right now, we are currently, these are the current components we have: Ansible, battery, detail pages, error boundary, error state, invalid object, not authorized, skeleton table, tag count, unavailable content, and warning module. We have a Medium article up on the page that's describing why we decided to do this. Basically, what we're trying to do is add a bunch of components from Patternfly to something that's more specific to Red Hat, to allow people to easily adapt these patterns without having to go over and do and rewrite them all in their entire product. So we just want one place where everything can live, and these are considered shared components as far as we're looking at it. Right now, we're currently working with OpenShift on this effort also. Now since we got through HCC, we have some other stuff going into HCC as the data view package as part of what we're looking at to migrate over. Currently, we have the close button that's already been migrated over. We have some updates to error boundary for OpenShift that we've added. That's been there since last week. So those are the two that have recently been updated. But this sprint's looking at adding log snippet, getting started, status, shortcut. And we're continuing to work with that team, the OpenShift team, to see what else we can migrate over. And if anybody else has anything else they would think that actually belongs as a shared pattern throughout Red Hat, it'd be nice to bring it up, or you send it over as an option to add to component groups. And that's it.
All right. Thank you, Don and Jesse and Jeff. I'll take my screen back over for a sec. So our next updates are going to be about the next implementations of our Modal and drag and drop component, which were included in the 5.2 release. Tani, do you want to take the screen over?
Yep.
All right.
Good morning. Can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we introduced a next implementation of the Modal component, which is just a composable implementation. So it maintains all the same functionality as it did before, but instead of passing all the props to the modal like we had in the previous implementation, we now have the modal body, the header, and the footer. So you can go ahead and compose those. For instance, in the basic example, we would have the modal here, and then we have the header, which we could pass the title to, and then internally would render the title of the modal. Then we have the body and the footer. And the nice thing about this is you could also have multiple bodies if you choose. So then here's a basic modal with multiple bodies. And then another nice thing is that it's easier to customize the header. So if you wanted to have a custom header for the modal, instead of passing the title, you would just pass children directly to the modal header. So here's an example where in the code here you can see that we have the modal header, and instead of passing it a title, you can just pass children, which would be the custom header that you see here. And then like a few things that would change with this is there are some props that instead of passing to the modal, we pass directly to the subcomponent. It's like, for instance, if you want a description, you would pass a description to the modal header. And then if you want to have a title icon, you would pass you'd pass the title icon variant to the header. But right now that's not displaying correctly. We have that issue open in core to update the styling there. And that will be included in our next release. That you just pass the title variant to the header. Another nice thing is that when we added a wizard to the modal in our current implementation, you'd have to, let's see, you'd have to pass a prop to the modal. This has no body wrapper prop to remove the body wrapper. But now with our new implementation, you would just pass the wizard directly as a direct child of the modal and leave out the body wrapper yourself. So there's a modal, and you just pass the wizard directly as a child. And everything else is pretty much the same. But with the help, you pass the help to the header rather than the modal now. Okay, and that's about it for the major differences. So this just allows you to have a more flexible implementation of the modal. Any questions about that? Okay, and that's all I have.
All right, thank you, Connie. And now on to Katie to demo her work on the next implementation of our drag and drop.
All right, let me share my screen. All right, is that showing up for everyone?
Yep.
All right, perfect. So with this latest release, we have the next version of our drag and drop. The biggest change between these two is that it's built off of a new package. So this drag and drop implementation is built off of the D&D kit library, and it covers the basic sorting within a single list. So dragging and dropping to reorder a single list. We'll be updating functionality as we go along in the future. So you can see it looks very similar when you do the drag and drop for the actual styling. Very slight differences because of the different libraries, but the functionality is all should be the same. The big reason we swapped to this new one is because this has actually keyboard handling native. So if you press enter here, you can start dragging it with your arrow keys and say you don't like that, so you can press escape to cancel. If you re-enter, you can hit enter again to drop the item and you're still focused on it, and these are all focusable. And this comes pretty much already included with D&D kit, which is awesome. This also does ARIA Live updates as you're dropping and dragging as well. So we've got a couple new examples. So we've got the basic sorting, and we can do it with a drag button, which you can see here. And if we go over to these React Next demos, we get into the more complex use cases. So we have two specific examples here. We've got a drag and drop sortable data list. So this is using our data list component, and in the code itself, pretty much what you end up doing is you create this drag drop sort and you tell it, okay, here's my variant is going to be a data list because it needs to know what kind of items it's going to be resorting. And otherwise it works very similarly. So you've got it to drag, and if you go with the keyboard functionality, you can see it will drag as well. And the other example we've got is a drag and drop sortable dual list selector, which you can make one or both panels selectable and it will update. So if you move them all over, there's nothing there to sort, or if you drag them all over there, let's see, dragging a leg with your keyboard or directly. Let's see, was there anything else? This example is more complex because it's got a bunch of dual list selector set up as well, but the actual pane that you're dragging and dropping would be you basically underneath the pane you want to be draggable. You include the drag drop sort object, give it the items, the callback, and telling it this is a dual list selector list that you're dragging. And I think that about covers it. Unless I'm forgetting anything. So Nicole, if you want to mention anything extra, but I think I've pretty much covered the main points. Any questions? All right. Well, I think that's about it then for drag and drop new.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Fix it. I was just going to add only that people might be seeing new drag and drop features come over time. Things like the draggable sortable table maybe, or if anyone has any other features or types of components they want to make sure if we have drag and drop enabled for, let us know.
Yeah, I know another feature we're going to be looking at adding is multiple drop zones as well. So this is mostly currently covering just reordering within a single drop zone. So reordering lists.
All right. Thank you, Katie. Next up, we're going to be digging into some updates to our content. The first item actually kind of blurs the line between a content update and a React update. So Eric, you want to take the screen over?
Sure. Okay. Hello, everyone. So this is something that we've actually presented quite a while ago, but since it's been a while, I just want to kind of give an update and just go over it again relatively quickly. So basically, we have a continuing effort to update the accessibility documentation for our component, like at a component level. And it's partially updating the actual structure of the content of the documentation, as well as just expanding on what might already be there. So right here, I have our page component from our website. This is what it currently looks like and what many of our components that had accessibility docs had looked like. We got some content that goes over keyboard users, screen reader users, and various props from a React perspective, or attributes for our HTML CSS library. And this effort has been done to several components that had accessibility docs, which accordion was one of them. And you can see here that the structure is more consistent and uniform, and has just been expanded upon from what was previously there. So what we have here is an accessibility section, which this goes over essentially as a consumer, kind of the bare minimum of what you might have to do to make your implementation of this component accessible. We have a testing section, which is essentially a list of checkboxes of things. You can go through your accordion or accordions, and you can say to yourself, okay, does each accordion toggle include unique and descriptive labels? It does. They do. Cool. Check it off. This is more of like a self-check. When you reload the page, it's not gonna save your progress or anything like that. But just a nice little interactive way to test your implementations yourself. And then we have a React customization and an HTML customization sections, which those go a little more in depth of, if you want to customize the accordion a bit more using our props or, classes or attributes. This is kind of where we list those things that could affect the accessibility and how it might, or, what the kind of effects are to using those props or classes or attributes. And sometimes we'll, throw in some code snippets to explain something a little further within each of those sections. But otherwise, each component should always have, these 4 sections. Depending on the component or, the content, we may have additional considerations, which could be either things that just didn't fit in the React or HTML customization sections, or kind of like ties into both. So here, we say for an accordion, an additional consideration is to avoid adding complex interaction to the accordion, and kind of why you should avoid doing that. That's kind of like an optional section for the documentation, and the further reading section is another kind of optional section. If we have links or other resources we think might be helpful for the consumer to look into, we'll put them here. And here we have an authoring practices guide for an accordion from w3.org. So that's kind of the continued effort we're making towards our component accessibility docs. Right now, we actually have a PR up in our org repo to update the page content. And after that goes in, the only update we'll have left for existing Ally docs is tree view. And then from there, we can continue forward adding accessibility documentation for our other components. So if there's any components anyone would like documentation added to more immediately, definitely let us know. You can reach out to me on Slack or anyone else on the Patternfly team on Slack. Otherwise, we might try and go through components that seem like they would be more valuable to update first than others. Like menu, I'm sure would be great to update ahead of some of the other components. But yeah, that is about it in terms of component accessibility documentation.
All right, thank you, Eric. Gonna steal the screen back for a second. Next up, we are going to have a few different topics to be covered by Aaron. Aaron, do you want to take the screen over?
Yes, actually. All right, I'll stick here for a second. Hey everyone, a few content updates to go through. Kind of staying on the same subject as Eric with accessibility. First wanted to point out some updates to our accessibility guidelines. I'm not going to click through the links on these next three, but just so you know, if you go into our slides, these should link right to the places I'm talking about here. But with our accessibility guidelines, I'm referring to our highest level accessibility docs. So let me see, maybe I can open. Maybe that would be, no, I'm not sharing it, mine. But that is just the highest level section on the Patternfly website related to all of our accessibility high level guidelines. And so these updates are part of the ongoing content audit effort that I'm going through. And I completed these docs in collaboration with Eric and Jesse. So thank you to y'all both. But yeah, some great updates I think went out to those guidelines. Lots of changes that I think people will be excited to take a read through. We also added some instructions related to our Figma library access. So this is within our design onboarding documents. Just wanted to make a quick update so that people had some updated instructions for getting access to our design library now that we have transitioned from Sketch to Figma. And there will be a follow-up issue here where I will do a larger scale redesign of our design onboarding information. But this is just kind of a quick thing so that people can get access now. And then I also updated our capitalization recommendations. This was a follow-up to UX writing updates that I completed for our content audit a couple of cycles ago. So just made some updates to our capitalization guidelines to kind of default to recommending sentence case. Kind of a small update, and of course, really will not impact too much currently. You know, the most important thing is to be consistent within your own product. So every product could have a slight variance here, but just wanted to point out that there are some changes there, and I think that's another thing that would be good to read through. So let me switch to my other tab. So I'm switching to our last link here on that slide, which is for, if it'll load, my content study updates. So I think I've made some whispers of this content research study at previous community meetings, and I just kind of wanted to loop back around on it to give some higher level overview of the whole process now that it's kind of wrapped. So this presentation, separate slides will take maybe like 5 to 7 minutes, something around there, just to give a little bit more context. And if you have any follow-up questions at the end, definitely feel free to ask. But for everyone here today, I just wanted to go through some of the design of the study to provide some context on exactly what it covered, go through some of the findings from the research, and then also touch on what the next steps will be for me. So the kind of genesis of the study was, as I was completing the content audit or working on it, I found that I often had a limited understanding of how people were actually using the content on the Patternfly website. So you can make some guesses there, but that would complicate the content strategy just a little bit. And especially since the content audit is a larger scale project that will be ongoing for a while, I just wanted to gain a little bit more insight into a few areas. So in order to do that, I worked with our research team to interview designers and developers to try and highlight and understand some of those expectations, needs, and goals from people that are using the website. And as I move through these slides, I just want you to kind of keep this question in mind. It just kind of frames everything that we found and that we're trying to focus on from this study, and that is what design opportunities can we leverage to make improvements to the onboarding experience for developers and designers that are using the Patternfly website. And so with onboarding, there were a couple of focus areas in this study. The first one was our getting started guides, and so those are the highest level get started documents that are primarily intended for onboarding people into Patternfly. But it also included our component documentation. So primarily we were focusing on React docs for our components, but it did kind of encompass all of those tabs that I kind of put there. So our React, our HTML, documentation, and also our design guidelines and accessibility for each component. And so we kind of we saw these as the primary onboarding areas into Patternfly because they are kind of like the foundational building blocks for the system. I worked with Ivan, our researcher. I don't know if he's on the call, but he put together a lot of really great questions for our user interviews, and these were just a couple that I wanted to highlight so that you had an idea of kind of how those interviews went. So when we were looking at our Get Started guides, we asked about participants' onboarding experiences with Patternfly. We asked what was their ideal content experience with our Get Started section and what their thoughts were on our current content in that section. And then similarly with our components, we were hoping to find people's ideal content experience with the component documentation, and also get some thoughts on the current content experience for some of our specific components. And then the study included 10 participants, both developers and designers. 7 were internal Red Hat users in red here, and then 3 were external users. And each of these interviews was about an hour each. So we had quite a lot of qualitative feedback to go through, which was really great and helpful. But to touch on the highlights from our research findings, because there was a lot of different areas of interest for us, circling back to some of the initial questions we were asking about how people were learning with Patternfly previously, we found that the large majority of our participants learned how to use Patternfly through job tasks. And so this is tasks and projects specifically related to their job duties. So a lot of people onboarded directly into Patternfly when they were beginning a project or beginning a job, and they were learning Patternfly by working on something that they actually were going to deliver for their project. And this was by far the most popular in comparison to content-oriented, which is reading through everything really detailed, and practice-oriented, which is similar to completing a job task, but it's just for practice. So this was really interesting finding for us. And then looking into component page usage specifically, like I said, we were directing people to our React docs specifically at first. So unsurprisingly, we found that the focus areas were pretty equally split on the example visual on those pages and also the code for examples. So by this, I'm referring to the code that enables each example on our React docs page, but also our React properties at the bottom, and then even mention on the HTML tabs, the CSS variables, for example. But a lot of people did mention our design guidelines as well. So even though we kind of tried to begin the focus on our React docs, it kind of covered all of the areas of the component documentation in the end, but that was actually really helpful anyway. So I won't get into so many details on our findings just because, like I said, there's like 10 hours of content. I attended half of the sessions myself, so I kind of heard that feedback firsthand. And then I also reviewed our recordings for the ones that I didn't go to. And these 3 themes were kind of what I saw trending the most among all of those different interviews. So we have some great opportunities identified to think about updating our information architecture across the website, as well as our website navigation. Of course, unsurprisingly, because this was kind of a focus area that we were pushing, we uncovered a lot of good ideas for some additional onboarding guidance and training resources for our users. And then we have also found a lot of different smaller enhancements that we can make to the content and visual design across the website. And then these are just kind of like a little peek at how we might move forward in these areas. This is definitely still something on our end that we're discussing and figuring out the best way to prioritize and move forward. But in terms of information architecture and navigation, I'm thinking about things such as information hierarchy across individual pages of our website, but also the organization and grouping of navigation items for the higher level website. With onboarding guidance and training, I already have plans to update our current design and develop onboarding guides and add new guidance as information is updated. And then with smaller content and visual design enhancements, there's there was a lot of interest in adding more visual diversity to the website in the form of images, tables, or different content presentations. And this is something I'm keeping in mind as I'm working on documentation now and adding as I can. But I think that there's also good opportunity for future research in this area to narrow things down a little bit more. And that's it. And like I said, I just want to give a special thanks to Ivan because he did a lot of work here. So if you see him, thank him.
Hey, Aaron, I have a question.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on having something that sets up some of this stuff with documentation and teaching people like a command line type tool?
Like having as
Like
part of the onboarding?
Command line tool that kind of sets up some of this stuff so that people can learn in different scenarios.
It sounds interesting. I'd be curious, like, it sounds like you might have some ideas in mind there. I think when it comes to helping people learn, anything is appreciated because we haven't had like a ton of resources to dedicate to that yet. So I don't know if other people have thoughts, but that sounds interesting depending on the details there.
Okay.
We can talk about it if you had something in mind.
Yeah, I have a few ideas in my mind, and what you're talking about actually aligns with my ideas. So
Yeah, I think a lot of the, sorry, I was gonna say quickly, though, the documentation that Aaron's been doing has involved establishing some templates for how to structure documentation better. So that kind of stuff could be easily programmed into some sort of CLI as well.
Another thing that we talked about on the design side is obviously people learn in different ways, and maybe we can offer some more like bite-sized recordings or something that people can just kind of watch at their own pace, or if they want a very specific example, they can search up a term and see how to build something in Figma. So that's still early. We're in conversation about Figma onboarding in the new library that we're working on. So there's lots of opportunity there.
Yeah, and I did want to add, like, as I move forward with some of these next step opportunities, I'll definitely present again and connect back to some of the research that we did, just so that people have kind of a full picture of how these things are hopefully coming to fruition, especially as we move through towards V6 and beyond. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. And everyone who asked great questions. Follow up to that. And our final topic for today is a bit of a announcement, bit of a teeny sneak peek at some Penta stuff. Andrew, you want to take it away?
Yeah, and I'll share my screen, but because I've got a couple screens I've got up that I can share out. So yeah, I might as well start now. Sharing. Okay, so a little backstory. I guess last June, a group of Patternfly designers, developers got together and we made this hackathon screen that we put together to show the new Penta visual theming that we're trying to do with the new version of Patternfly coming out. So this is just a simple table page that we created in a span of 3 days, I think. From there, we've been working hard on creating the new visual theme for Patternfly, which will be available in the summer this year. So there's a lot of visual changes that we're working through, and we're trying to get to an alpha release, which will be at the end of February. So I just want to give a little preview of what that looks like and some of the components that we're doing. So I'm going to quickly do some screens, but main one being like button functionality is going to be improved a little bit. So we've obviously rounded the corners and softened things up a little bit. We've worked with the DPO group on the new color palette. Something that I wanted to call out is there's a lot of intention behind this library. As we're going through the process, we have to consider how icons appear over top of other like elements like cards or on buttons. So there is a new token system that's going into the library. And we have this semantic layer of tokens, and then we have all the other variables that feed into it. And the semantic layer is like a more human readable variation that we can apply. So if I have an icon in a button, on the danger button, for example, it's named in a way that is that icon color on danger, default on hover. So it's very easy to kind of translate all that information. But we are very intentionally mapping things out so that no matter what color it is, what it appears over top of, we have a light and dark theme version of all that is accessible. So really big kudos to the designers on the team who have been focused on this. It's a lot of work to think through all this. I really appreciate the work. I've already got a hand. Go for it, Kevin.
Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. If you could go back, well, I guess I did. But if you could go back to that, the Panify page, yeah, the Panify one is good. I guess this works too. Yeah, my question was just around the curve on the buttons.
Mhm.
I'm trying to determine if the roundedness that you have, like the more accentuated or like the more like emphasized roundedness for primary buttons, and what type of button should be more curved than others. Because like even on this design on it by itself, right, I can see different types of drop down. Those have a different, right, different curves. I don't know, sorry, can't articulate what I'm trying to say, but essentially, yeah, how curvy should this thing be? How do we determine what it is or what it isn't?
So all the like main action buttons, the primary buttons, secondary, tertiary, block, all those kind of high level interactive elements are all these kind of pill shape. It's hard to see on the screen share, but like a lot of corner rounding, like our page areas, navigations have softer. This is an old screen, so that all the styles aren't necessarily translated, and we are still working through a lot of the code. So there's going to be things that stand out as not quite right. We're still in the process of updating. But even on, actually, if I jump a little bit, I'm just going to skip ahead. We've added this kind of additional styling on hover states for these plain buttons, which is a blend mode that works on all backgrounds. So we can we don't have to worry about having a bunch of variations of hover on X background. So this is just a blend mode that will work on a red background. Don't use a red background. We're trying to avoid colored backgrounds as much as possible. I hope I'm answering your question, but we also have it on tabs.
I'll also add that we did do testing on that decision. We had some A/B testing with the rounded rectangular buttons versus the pill-shaped. And the feedback we got was that people liked that the buttons were differentiated more, especially when you get into like the tertiary styling from the drop downs and the form inputs.
Okay, that makes sense, Lucia. So the tertiary styling is specifically for things like form controls and not necessarily other CTAs across the menu. I mean, across the UI, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the rounded rectangular is for form inputs and drop downs menu toggle. Yeah.
Sorry if I slowed down your presentation, Andrew.
Don't worry, man. Okay. Garrett, I saw your comment in chat there, and that is a really good call out, and that's something that we've noticed ourselves, and that's something that we're talking about with the larger DPO group. It does technically pass accessibility, but it feels like it's a little bit close. So that's feedback that we're going back to them with. But definitely, I saw that too. This is the new alert styling. I won't go through every single component page, but I just want to give you like some highlights where you can see the rounded corners and the updated palette for our status colors. This is a mock-up of kind of like an OpenShift homepage, the overview page on that product, and it has a lot of rounded stuff there. All the labels are getting the updated color palette. And like I said before, we have like on every we have status colors and we have non-status colors, and all the icons and text are mapped to specific tokens that appear and will work accessibly over top of each of those corresponding colors. Notification drawer with some new styling, card view, and I think we've got one more. Is just like a kind of a data list or table view. Actually, I'm going to go back. I got like this one, for example, just the dark theme switching work. All this stuff was done very intentionally. I think Patternfly 4, we introduced a dark theme kind of late in the release, whereas with this one, it was kind of a consideration from the very beginning on how to map everything one-to-one. So even in the design kit that we're working on in Figma, we have light and dark theme versions that actually happen seamlessly when you transition between light and dark frames. This stuff kind of swaps on its own. So not to go into too many screens, but just want to kind of give a quick overview of what we're doing. Next steps after the alpha release, which is coming kind of end of February, early March. We're working through all the extensions library as well, making sure that those styles are updated there. We'll have a beta release getting a few months on, and hoping to release in the early summer. So a lot of work. Really, the team is doing a really good job trying to get all this stuff together. It's certainly not been an easy task, but really happy to see it. We're almost at the alpha release. Very exciting. Questions, comments, concerns? Stop sharing. With the alpha release, we'll be releasing our Penta or Patternfly kit, which will be going along with the V6 release, so designers can start playing around a little bit more and testing it out. Onboarding and documentation is something that we're working on. So with the alpha release, we're going to release migration docs as well. There'll probably be a blog post on the website about how to check out the V6 staging site, and some of the updates and how we're handling things in a different way.
All right, thank you, Andrew. And that is all of our scheduled topics for the day. Does anyone have any questions, feedback about any of those topics or anything else, Patternfly? We've got, looks like, a few minutes left. All right, if not, then thanks all for coming. That is our, at least early February community meeting.